What is the role of religion in our ever-changing world? From the News Channel 5 network, this is Issues of Faith.
Hello everyone, welcome to Issues of Faith. I am Ben Hall. Today we're talking about staying connected to God despite the cultural noise, despite all the distractions that are around us. And we're very happy to have with us someone that you certainly have read if you are in Nashville. He worked for the Tennessean for many years, still writes a column. Ray Waddle, thank you. Author,
thank you, Ben.
Senior byline, Tennessean, New York Times, all over the place. So we're happy to have you here.
Thank you, pleasure to be here.
Just written a book called Undistorted God, Reclaiming Faith Despite the Cultural Noise. And it's such a fascinating topic. Undistorted God, Reclaiming Faith Despite the Cultural Noise. There's so many things that come up with that. It sounds almost like you're saying we're losing faith in the midst of the cultural noise. Is that what you feel or have seen, or what about that?
Well, I think there is a sense of embattlement. People feel it, you know. We're in a time of distraction. Okay, yeah, I think that's pretty clear. There's different ways to look at that. I mean, one is you think there's these large forces at work, economic, technological. We seem to be in the middle of a permanent tech revolution. The question is, are we in control of it, or is it in control of us? And there are these large forces, but I think the conditions we find ourselves in are the results of a million choices, a million decisions we are all making all the time. One of the choices we can make is to remember that we're human beings who have the freedom to step back and get some perspective, even inject some realism, some skepticism into the moment we're in. But for that to happen, I think we've got to reclaim, we've got to remember certain values that we have access to. Spiritual traditions give those. In the book I've written, I try to identify some foundational ideas that, from my church-going experience, have helped me, or I think have staying power, have permanence, despite all these trends, all these fashions, including spiritual fashions, but including the onslaught of the technological, modern, postmodern world.
How does, in your opinion, and as a reporter and somebody that's covered religion, how does religion stay relevant in the midst of all of this? And based on what I've seen of the book, you have some specific sort of things that people should be thinking about or perhaps doing. We need to just hold on to some of these basic things. But what about that? How does religion stay relevant in the midst of all of what's going on?
Well, we can look at religion as the keeper of wisdom that goes back a long way, that has proved itself over time. But we're constantly sorting it out, constantly testing it, making sure it still works. That's part of the conversation that makes up the religious tradition, whoever it is, across the world traditions of religion. A couple of things come to mind. I think an important, compelling idea to me that's inexhaustible, that it kept me going in the writing of the book, is that the idea that we're made in the image of God. What does that mean? That's back, you find that in the book of Genesis, first or second chapter. What does that mean? It's mysterious, it's powerful, it's revolutionary if we take it seriously. There's always been debate as to what it means. Does it mean there's an imprint on us somewhere? Literally an image of God somehow? Could that be what the soul is? That's what we mean when we say soul. Or does it mean that we're simply deputized by the Creator to be God's bodies on earth? To enact 10 Commandments, the teachings, the Sermon on the Mount, all of it. Or does it mean that we have attributes of God, like creativity and empathy and compassion, the ability to make peace, the ability to imagine a better way? Image of God is an idea that's been taught by faith all these years, and I think the staying power of that, the mystery of that, is something I think we can restore some of our own confidence if we feel too overwhelmed. I mean, the idea is to use such an idea when distractions become not a measure of freedom, but a kind of tyranny and tyrannical. That's when you have to fight back, push back with the skepticism that religious faith can actually provide. We're not used to thinking of skepticism that way, but that's how I look at it.
And when you say restore confidence, do you get the sense that religious institutions have lost some confidence, that they're not talking about some of the things that they used to talk about and maybe should be talking about, or have they lost some confidence in your view?
I get that sense from talking to different groups that, well, it's interesting because we're in a time, sort of a post-doctrinal time. People are not talking about, in a second nature kind of way, they're talking about doctrine as much as they used to. Some are, but many are not. I think in the older days, people were very doctrinally identified, and that made for a lot of conflict. That made for a lot of division between the denominations. I don't think we see that as much. That's good in that churches, groups of people, different groups of people are getting along better, perhaps, than they used to be. I'm thinking of the American situation or the Southern situation, even in a city like Nashville. Interfaith relations in the old days used to mean a Baptist married a Methodist. You know, that was it. But now interfaith and pluralism are very different things. But I don't sense that theological discussion is second nature anymore. We don't talk about the things like, I don't think lay people talk about it so much anymore. So it's hard to.
Well, like being made in the image of God. That is not a discussion that you hear a lot.
Well, I think people grasp that notion. I've certainly heard about it, but I think it's got all kinds of ramifications. If we just walk with that a little while and think about it, it would have political implications too. I think, you know, if everybody's in the image of God, that's an inconvenient thing to have to conclude, that we all have to treat each other a little better and come to some understanding of each other.
So when you say that we're not talking, or we're getting along better, and maybe when we're not talking about some of these doctrinal type things, certainly we do see a lot of, maybe it's been replaced with political discussion, where, and in that sense, there's some contentiousness that has turned people off.
Yeah. A couple of things on that. I talk about lack of confidence sometimes. I think just the routine of daily life, depending so much on habits of thought that come out of science, biology, geology. We tend to think there's a conflict between religion and science, and just from the sheer noise of it, religion seems to be losing that battle, when in fact I think it's a false conflict. But the effect is religion gets sort of elbowed out of the way and doesn't get talked about as much, and it's a matter of finding and keeping, developing a vocabulary for that. I think one of the biggest challenges we face as a world is keeping our own integrity as believers, but also having true respect for someone who doesn't believe what we believe. And that means, you know, learning to listen, but also means knowing what we believe, but having the confidence to be generous enough, you know, to learn respect for someone else and maybe learn something from that person. So.
And if you have been brought up being told it is your job to, you know, save someone's soul and as a result go out and convert them, then that's when I think you have that sort of conflict. Yeah.
Well, it certainly makes sense for people. I mean, that's part of the mandate of religion, of many faiths, is to share, to share your faith, and but I think to share, reasons why, in a way that persuade reasonably and not coercively. That's the difference. I think that's the best witness one can do, and that's still the mandate. It's not about not sharing, but about sharing wisely.
And so, in this world with all these distractions, what is the answer? Do you think people are yearning for faith in a way that we haven't seen in a long time, or what do you think? We're connected in so many ways, and yet I feel like there's this emptiness out there.
Well, there's a theory that I guess some sociologists and others have been using for decades, if not centuries, that religion is going to go away. It's going to recede, it's going to decline, it's going to disappear. It'll first maybe withdraw into the private heart of people, but then eventually vanish. We've seen actually that that's not the case. The yearning is still there. Churches, synagogues, all kinds of temples, mosques have to learn in every generation to retell their story, and that's the case now. It's always the challenge, without retelling the story without losing the essentials of the story. Talking about the image of God, I think that's an irreducible idea which keeps the yearning, the seeking going. An aspect of that is that we're always asking the questions, or we have the right to ask, what's the story here? What's the story? Let's step back. Yes, what's the story of America? That's one thing. What's the daily story that I'm chasing as a reporter? That's another. But what's the story of my life? That's another thing. But what's really the story here? What's going on? What is this about? My thought, this is not in any way original, obviously, but a compelling thought to me is that God is the creator, God is the author. God is the author of us, of our story, of the story. That means there's a plot, preferably with a beginning, a middle, and an end, preferably in that order. There's a plot, and we're all involved. It invites and involves everybody. If there's a plot, if there's a story, then the details matter. Our attention, our alertness matters. And on the Christian side of things, the story involves some weird turns from unlikely places that you don't expect. So it pays to pay attention to what the next turn of the plot is. Mary and Joseph having this newborn in this obscure town in the middle of nowhere at the time. Death of the Son of God on the cross, an empty tomb, a resurrection. One unlikely piece of plot after another. What's the story? I think it's an adventure if we can keep that in mind and realize that we're all involved. We're all characters.
We're playing this part, but you can take comfort in the fact, if you jump ahead to the ending, that God wins.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
God wins. Maybe we all end up winning that way, but God's still somehow in charge. I think the notion of providence is important. I've had this theory for a while that we're kind of losing this sense of providence, and we're gaining instead. What's taking its place is a sense of luck. In the old days, I'm old enough to remember when gambling wasn't legalized, and people, I'll just generalize, people. I'll put trust in God. Now it's we think we can control it maybe with luck. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I'd like to play with that more. Have we lost the idea of providence? But I think that's an important notion. Trust in God, in the universe, that it's going to come out right in the end.
And all right, you wrote for many years for the Tennessean. We saw your byline for the Tennessean. Now you're the editor of the Yale Divinity Reflections, the magazine. So I want to take a break, and then we'll come back. I want to talk about what they're writing about, Yale Divinity, what they're talking about. So we'll take a break, be back right after this.